Hey Pro Church Media community, this is Jason, and if you didn't know, Christmas is just around the corner, so it's time to panic! Just kidding, we're here to help you not panic, and we're going to do so by looking at how to create this fun gold foil image directly inside of Photoshop. You won't need any third-party assets or anything like that. Everything's going to be created from scratch. It's super simple, so you can create as many gold foil images as you need, which work great for lots of Christmas looks, especially for things like text overlays and different textures and things like that. So I think this will be super useful, but enough of me talking about it, let's get in and do this. Okay, so we're going to start with a new document. To hit Command-N on your keyboard to pull up that. And then I'm going to make it 2500 by 2500 with a resolution of 72. Hit Create, and we have our new document. Okay, let's start by creating just a rectangle background. So get your rectangle tool, and I'm going to pick something like a sort of dark gray, maybe something like that, and then just draw a rectangle. Super simple, something like that, and we'll be good to go. Okay, now we need to start just brushing onto this, and so create a new layer, and then pull up your brush tool by hitting B. And we need to get some kind of brush that's going to give us a nice grungy spatter kind of look. And so if you're in Photoshop 2019, there's already some great brushes included in it. So if you go up to the brush panel right here and go down to the special effects brushes, there's one called Kyle's, where is it? Supreme Spatter Brush. And this is a really great one that, does, let me get something you can see, does something like that. And so it creates this great spatter, which is nice and random, even if you're using a mouse. So we're going to be doing something like that. Okay, so once you have that ready to go, I'm going to pick something like a orangey color, since maybe something that's a warmer color, something like this, just because we're going to be making a gold foil thing, and so I think something like this will work. And then I'm just going to start kind of brushing around just as random as I can be, different fills and things like that. And I don't want it to be too uniform or look like it's a pattern that's being generated, so just nice and random, some nice buildup in certain places and then sparser in other areas, things like that. You might drop the opacity down and do the same thing, just kind of fill in just a bit, just to get some nice contrast going on. That's going to give us a nice look. I think that'll work pretty well. I'm going to create another layer, and maybe for this one I'll do like a darker, like kind of a mid-gray or something like that. Just brush in there. Maybe I need to turn the opacity up, something like that. Just something to break up what I have there so far. Maybe that'll work pretty well. I might do another layer, and I might sample this kind of orangey yellow and maybe just change the color slightly, maybe just a bit more saturation, and drop the opacity a bit, and then just start brushing in again. I'm just looking for some nice random fills and sparseness and all kinds of stuff like that. I think that's looking pretty good. One more layer I think will work. I'm going to do a lighter gray here, and then let's bump the opacity up, just kind of brush in here in the middle, something like that. And then maybe one more layer, brush on top of that a bit more, and maybe I'll turn the blending mode to like screen or something like that, and add a few more in here, drop the opacity just a bit, and I think that will work pretty well. Okay, so now we're going to turn these all into a smart object, so just select all these layers, and then once they're all selected, right click and go to Convert to Smart Object. Now that we have the smart object, Photoshop is going to treat it as one layer, which will be super helpful. But if you ever want to make any modifications, you can always double click on this icon to open up a temporary document where you can go and make changes, and then any changes that you make once you save this will be reflected in the original smart object. So you can always go in and make any modifications that you want. Okay, so now we need to add a couple effects to this layer. So if you go up to Filter and then scroll down to Pixelate, then go over to Crystallize. We're going to use this effect, and you can see a preview of what it's giving you. For something at this resolution, with this kind of grunginess and stuff, I found that cell size of like 11 or 10 or something like that works pretty well. If you go up any higher, it just starts to look bad. If you go down too low, you're not going to see any difference. So something like 11 or 10 or 12 will work pretty well. I'm going to go with 11, hit OK. And now you can see what it did. It gave us this nice crystallized pattern that's going on, almost a mosaic of sorts, which is cool. Okay, we're going to add one more effect to this layer, and if you go up to Filter and then scroll down to Filter Gallery, I normally don't use the Filter Gallery effects just because they tend to be not that useful, but in this case it's actually going to be useful for us. So if you go down to Distort and then to Ocean Ripple, you're going to get something that looks like this. If you pull up the ripple size really high, it's going to start to look like dust, which is actually kind of cool, but we're not going to do that right now. And if you go down too low, you're not going to see much difference, and it's going to look more like glass. I think something around like 5 or 6 will work pretty well. And then for ripple magnitude, you can adjust that as you want. Too low and you're not going to get any difference. Too high and it's going to be more like frosted glass, which is actually pretty cool looking. But for this one, I think I'm just going to go something like 10 or 11. I think will work pretty well. Hit OK, and now we have kind of the base of our gold foil. Okay, so obviously this doesn't look like gold foil right now. I mean, it's still kind of cool looking, but we need to adjust some of the coloring and just the luminance and stuff like that. So let's start with a new gradient layer. So if you make a new layer and then go up to hit G on your keyboard to pull up the gradient tool. And then if you go up to this gradient editor, you can pull this up and start creating your own gradient. I'm going to get rid of that if there's any in the middle. And then for this one, I'm going to maybe choose this color over here, this kind of orangey color, and then hit OK. And then for this one, I want it to be almost the same color, but maybe a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to see if I can find something lighter. It doesn't look like I did. So I'm just going to go into this by double clicking on it, or just click on that color well, and then just make it just a bit lighter, hit OK, and then hit OK. All right, now I'm going to zoom out with Command minus, and then with the gradient tool selected, again hitting G on your keyboard, you can start just clicking and dragging out a gradient, and you can kind of see how it affects it just by how long of a gradient path you draw. And so I think something like that will work pretty well, and you can do whatever angle you want, and you can also do a radial one if you want to, or whatever you want to do. I'm going to stick with linear. I think something like that will work pretty well. And then for the mode, I'm going to change it to color, and it's going to function kind of like a gradient map. And so something like that, and then maybe just drop the opacity down to something like 70 or so. And I think that's looking pretty good. All right, let's make another layer. We're going to create another gradient fill. So if you go back up to your gradient layer, I'm going to choose something more like a darker gray right here, maybe kind of push it towards the blues just a bit, something like that. Hit OK. For this other color right here, again, not quite white, kind of like this off gray, but keep it towards the blues or a cooler kind of gray, like that. And then I'm going to put one right in the middle just by clicking right there. And I want this one to be kind of in between, maybe something like that. I think something like that will work pretty well. And then hit OK, hit OK. And I think I might start from the bottom here, so just click and drag up. I think I kind of like that. So this one I'm going to turn to soft light, and this is just going to help pull out more contrast. You can see before is a little flatter, and this just adds some contrast in the tonality. And you can adjust the opacity if you want to. Maybe even try overlay. That's too much, so we'll stick with soft light. And this still might be just a little bright. Maybe something like 60. It's all going to depend on this bottom image and what you did with it. Okay, so now let's get even more contrast in this by adding a levels adjustment. So go up to layer and then new adjustment layer and then levels. Hit OK. And then over here in your properties panel, you can start to adjust the levels. I'm going to pull the darks over just to get some more contrast on the low end. And maybe pull in the highlights, maybe move the mids over just a bit, and you can see we're starting to get a lot of nice contrast going on in here. And even some of those colors from the original are pulling through just a bit, which is kind of nice. I might bump up this just a bit just to kind of get rid of those grays, and I think that's looking nicer. right, let's add some more contrast with a curves adjustment. So if you go to layer and then new adjustment layer and then curves, hit OK. I'm going to start by drawing just a moderate S curve, so just pull that up a bit, click and drag and pull the darks down a bit, and then I'm going to crush the blacks a bit just to kind of, it almost has that rusted, almost galvanized feel, I guess. And maybe, there's too much contrast in the low end. I could see about, I need to leave the whites up there, so I think that's looking pretty nice. Maybe not have the mid-highs as high, so it almost kind of crushes the highlights just a bit too, and so we have more of that, almost a galvanized matte finish, which is kind of nice looking. So there we go. All right, so now we need to just kind of finish off adjusting the colors a bit. So let's add a hue adjustment layer. Go to layer, new adjustment layer, hue saturation, and then hit OK. And then I might just pull the saturation down just a bit, and you can see we're starting to get a nice kind of almost gold foil effect going on here. And you can adjust the lightness if you need to. I think I like kind of where it's at, something like that. And I might do one more of these, so I'm just going to duplicate it with Command J, and that's too desaturated, so I might just pull the saturation back up. Sometimes you get better results if you kind of stack these instead of trying to do all your adjustments on one of them, just because of how they interact. And so that's kind of why I'm doing that. Maybe pull the lightness down just a bit, saturation up just a hair. You can even adjust the hue if you want to. I think it's probably okay where it's at. Maybe +2 will be nice. And so we're just about there. I think I might add one more hue adjustment layer right above the main image. So I'm going to make sure this is selected. Go to layer, new adjustment layer, hue saturation. Hit OK, and then for this I might just adjust the hue just to kind of see what I get. I think that's looking pretty nice. And I think I might need to pull up the opacity of this just to even out the colors. I don't want too much of that orange coming through over against everything else, but I think that's looking pretty nice. All right, I might just duplicate, maybe pull the saturation down just a hair. Get the lightness down just a bit. And then I could try duplicating this just to see what happens. That's too dark. So maybe I can adjust it again. And maybe the saturation is too high still, so I might just pull it down up here. And I think we're getting a nice look going on there. And you can play around with this forever until you get the exact look that you want. You could even duplicate this other gradient to get even more contrast. That might be just a bit too much, but then you can always drop the saturation down. You can even duplicate this one again just to see what you get. And then you can really just fine-tune how this looks. That's obviously not what I want, but you can play around with it forever and ever until you get what you want. So I think we have a pretty good looking gold foil effect here. So now it's time to apply it to something. You could either save it as a JPEG and use it as a background or something like that, or what you could do, I'm going to group all these with Command G by selecting them all, then grouping them with Command G. And I might duplicate this, again Command J, and then I'm going to call this foil, and then I'm going to make this into a smart object, so convert to smart object. Now I'm going to add some text in. I'm just going to type in Christmas here, and let's see. I'm using the font Lust Script, which you can get from Adobe Fonts if you're a Creative Cloud subscriber. It's a great all-around font, but it works really nicely for Christmas, especially with this effect. I'm going to put Christmas below the foil, doesn't matter what color it is, and then right-click on Foil, choose Create Clipping Mask, and just like that we have a gold foil overlay for our Christmas text. And since this is a clipping mask, I can move it around until I get exactly the look that I want, and all kinds of stuff like that. So maybe you want it more on the darker end of things, lighter end of things. The nice thing about this foil that we created is it contains all these different variations. So every time you use it, you can make it look different really easily. And of course, you can make tons of different gold foil looks really quickly in new documents. And so that's basically it. Gold foil is super easy to create in Photoshop, looks great, is super useful, especially for Christmas stuff. So get out there, create some gold foil, make some cool Christmas looks, and I will talk to you later.